It's no secret that China's economy is in big trouble in the short term. They've got a collapsing housing market, failing banks. They took out mountains of debt to build entire cities that nobody lives in. So, in the short term, China's economy is in big trouble. But in the long term, there is a massive problem on the horizon that nobody's talking about. And that is China's declining birth rate, their aging demographics, and the outright collapse of the Chinese population that's going to start next year. It's going to continue for the rest of this century. What's up, guys? I'm Nobody Special. And China likes to portray itself as this insurmountable, giant, monolithic dragon that's just destined to conquer the whole world. That's the image the CCP wants you to have in your head when you think of China. But anybody who actually studies China's Communist Party and its history and some of the colossal blunders that they've made over the years knows that China is really just a paper dragon, that the CCP is a gaggle of power-hungry morons that will inflict untold suffering on their people in order to stay in power and increase their own personal wealth, and they don't let pesky things like courts or civil rights or elections stand in their way. Now, another thing people think of when they hear China is they think of this giant empire or this kingdom that's thousands and thousands of years old. Well, that's just not true. The People's Republic of China, otherwise known as Communist China, came to power in 1949. The country's only 73 years old. Now, while the landmass that currently makes up China has a rich history spanning multiple empires and dynasties, the CCP, the Communist Chinese government, that's only a 73-year-old country. It's actually much younger than even the United States, which is itself a very young country. But in just its short history spanning a few decades, the Chinese Communist Party has made some pretty colossal blunders. After Chiang Kai-shek was expelled and fled to Taiwan, Mao Zedong took over in China, and one of his first policies was known as China's Great Leap Forward. See, Mao took a look at his very poor country that was made up of mostly farmers and decided, you know what, I want to be an industrial powerhouse like some of these Western economies. So Mao's bright idea was to order the farmers to put down their farm tools and go to work in the cities at steel mills. What a great idea. We'll force people to modernize, and we'll kill anybody who speaks out against it. Problem is, nobody said, Mao, crap, there's nobody left to work on the farms. Who's going to grow the food? And somewhere between 40 and 60 million people starved to death in what became known as China's Great Famine from 1958 to 1962. Tens of millions of people starved to death because the CCP's central planners just decided, too many farmers, we need more steel mills. This beautifully illustrates the flaws of central planning when people who spend their time totally removed from the rest of civilization and they surround themselves with sycophants and they spend their days in echo chambers, they come up with these great ideas on behalf of millions of people. It's almost always the wrong decision for at least half of those people. This is the fundamental flaw of communism, and this is what capitalism gets right, because capitalism allows people to make decisions that are right for them based on their unique situation, their own local level. So what does the CCP do after this colossal blunder that kills tens of millions of people through starvation? Well, they wait about 20 years, and then they made another colossal blunder called the one-child policy in order to contain what they saw as out-of-control population growth. And it's that one-child policy that is causing the problem today that is going to doom China's economy, and it's why China is not this unstoppable dragon that's about to take over the world. And with that, we are going to shrink my big melon of a head, and let's take a look at a couple of these charts. What you're looking at right here is called a population pyramid. Now, this is a hypothetical population period of a sustaining population. This is a population that is neither growing nor shrinking. Their birth rate is exactly 2.1 children for every woman. This is a sustained population. Now, each line on this chart, starting from the bottom, represents an age group. 0 to 4-year-olds make up the bottom. There's your babies, there's your toddlers, all the way up to your senior citizens. You notice by the time you get up around 100 years old, all the men have died. There's a few women left, but the population shrinks as you move up the age pyramid. This is what a normal sustained population would look like. And this is what the population pyramid looks like for China. Now, do you notice anything different about this chart? Where are all the babies? Now, this is based on 2020, and this problem has only gotten worse. Look at this very bottom bar here. 1-year-old babies in 2020. Look how few children there were. Now, keep in mind, this population chart, these bars are constantly moving up over time. Well, these bars don't get any bigger, right? 1-year-olds aren't born. 10-year-olds aren't born. Only babies are born. So this tiny little bar at the bottom for 2020 is never going to get any bigger. It's only going to get smaller as time goes on. And you'll notice this is an aging population. Look at all of the people in China. Most of their population demographic is between the age of 60 and 30. The problem is, as those people age, there's not enough people in their 20s or in their teens to come in and replace those people in the workforce or in the real estate market. So as the older members of China's population ages and starts to die, there are not enough new people being born or enough new people maturing into the workforce to replace them. This is a death sentence for China's economy. Now, simply put, what's causing this is there are just not enough babies being born in China. Now, what you're looking at in this chart, this is the fertility rate in China, and this goes all the way back to the 1960s. And you'll notice just after the Great Famine that the birth rate in China really started to decline. Now, it's very important to mention the replacement rate. The replacement rate of the population is 2.1. You need 2.1 births for every woman in your population in order to sustain that population. And if you'll notice, China's population has been below the replacement rate of 2.1 since pretty much 1991. That means for 31 years, there have not been enough kids born in China to replace the number of people who are going to start dying soon. And again, you can see that in this chart. Look at the population trends for people 30 years and younger. There just have not been enough people born. Now, another thing I want to point to on this chart is these dark shaded regions on the ends of the chart. That is surplus males. There are 39 million more men in China than there are women. That's 39 million men who will not have children in their lifespan. There just aren't enough women to go around. That's going to contribute even more to this declining birth rate. It's gotten so bad now that the fertility rate in China has dropped to 1.16 children per woman born in 2021. Only 1.16. That is not a sustainable fertility rate. The population of China is on the brink of collapse. And you can see that here. This is the total number of births in China, numbered in millions, going all the way back to 1949. And look here, since about 2015, 2016, the number of births in China has just been in free fall, and it shows no sign of slowing. Last year, there were only 10.6 million babies born in China. Keep in mind, China has a population of 1.4 billion. Only 10.6 million babies were born last year. Now, keep in mind that the one-child policy was initiated in China in 1980. In 1980, the fertility rate was 2.814 births for every woman in China. Remember, the replacement rate is 2.1. The goal of the one-child policy was to stop what they viewed as out-of-control population growth. And it looks like the one-child policy did accomplish its goal. By 1989, the fertility rate began to drop. Problem was the fertility rate continued to drop beyond even the replacement rate in 1993. So what happened? Did the Chinese Communist Party withdraw the one-child policy in 1993? No, they did not. Because when you are a totalitarian government and you rule through absolute fear, you're not allowed to change your mind. Because changing your mind projects weakness. It implies the possibility that you could make a mistake, that you're not all-powerful, all-knowing. You're a flawed human being, as we know all human beings are. Well, with the Chinese Communist Party, they can't do that. So they kept their incorrect, wrong, one-child policy in place all throughout the early 2000s. Even after it became obvious that the one-child policy was going to cause a serious demographic collapse in China, they kept that policy in place until 2015. Because the CCP will never admit they're wrong. And even then, they only allowed a second child. It wasn't until last year that they even began to allow a third child. It's another flaw of communism. You can never admit you're wrong. You cannot easily pivot or change direction. You're stuck with the decisions that you make for way too long because changing direction implies weakness, and it gives your people ideas like maybe their government isn't perfect. If they didn't already learn that when 60 million of them were starved to death by the Great Leap Forward, that is. And this is what China's population is projected to look like by 2030. And you'll notice this declining birth rate is going to continue through the 2020s. And the number of surplus males is going to keep getting bigger and bigger. China's population is on the brink of collapse. And check out this chart here in nature.com. This is showing a number of different possible projections for what China's population might do through the rest of this century. Now, this is a year or two old. This is 2020 data, but here we are showing where the population is today at this red line. You'll notice virtually every single one of these projections has the population either peaked already or peaking in the next few years. And that is true. Last year in 2021, China's population grew by just 480,000 people. That is the smallest population growth in China since the Great Famine in the 1960s. As soon as next year, China's population will be in decline. And not just a slow decline. Virtually all of these projections show a significant and steep decline in China's population through the next couple of decades. And if you look at some of these more bearish projections, they're showing China's population could be cut in half by the end of this century. An insurmountable dragon that is destined to conquer the world does not lose 50% of its population in just 80 years. And the CCP is already starting to show that it's worried about this problem. Here we are in Reuters, just dated today. China to discourage abortions to boost low birth rate. China will discourage abortions and take steps to make fertility treatment more accessible as part of efforts to boost one of the world's lowest birth rates, its national health authority said on Tuesday. So obviously China's housing market is already in dire straits. They've got a mountain of debt. There are 65 million vacant apartments in China. That's enough to house the entire population of France. The Chinese developers have already sold millions of apartments that haven't even been built yet. And the Chinese government is trying to strong-arm banks into lending even more money to those failing developers so they can finish construction of those apartments because they have a mortgage boycott that's going on in that country, and that could threaten the whole Chinese banking system. Now take all of that and then fast forward 20 years, and there's millions less people to live in them. Supply and demand are now way, way out of whack in China. And that says nothing about the shrinking labor force. That says nothing about the decline in GDP. This population collapse has already happened. The declining birth rate has already set this in motion. It's already too late. You can't give birth to a 20-year-old, and so when the current workforce begins to age out into retirement, there is just not enough people to replace them. And as much as they would like to portray Xi Jinping as Superman and all he needs to do is go into a phone booth and change and he can fly off and save the day, unfortunately, this problem is the direct result of the failure of communist central planning making stupid, bonehead decisions on behalf of more than 1 billion people, and this population collapse is the result that you get. This problem perfectly illustrates the failure of communism, and this is why communism fails every time. And it's not just China that's seeing a shrinking population. Actually, most of the world is seeing a declining birth rate. Not as bad as China's, but still a declining birth rate. And if you want to know more about that, you can check out this video I did about misguided efforts to force us to eat bugs because they think the world's population is growing out of control when really it's contracting. Till next time, live small and dream big.